Tonight, let your body become still. Let your shoulders soften. Let your hands rest without needing to hold anything for a little while. You have carried so much through the noise of the day, through the thoughts that kept circling, through the questions that did not find an answer, through the prayers that seemed to rise into the dark and disappear without a sound. And now, in this quiet hour, there is nothing you need to prove. There is nothing you need to fix before you are allowed to rest. You do not have to explain your exhaustion to God. He has seen the weight you have been carrying. He has seen the places inside you that have grown tired from waiting. He has seen the hope that once felt bright become small and trembling, like a candle trying to stay alive in a room with too much wind. And even here, especially here, you are not alone. There are moments in life when the heart does not simply feel sad. It feels late. It feels as though the door has closed. It feels as though the moment when help could have arrived has already passed. And now all that remains is silence, memory, and the ache of what might have been. Maybe you know that feeling. Maybe you have prayed for something with all the faith you could gather, and still the answer did not come the way you hoped. Maybe you waited for healing, waited for reconciliation, waited for a change in someone you love, waited for peace in your mind, waited for a sign that God was still near. And when the waiting stretched longer than you thought you could bear, a quiet fear began to whisper inside you. What if it is too late? What if hope has died? What if the story is already over? But tonight, gently, slowly, tenderly, we are going to enter a story where everything looked too late, and yet Jesus was not finished. So breathe slowly now. Let the breath come in like mercy. Let the breath go out like surrender. You do not have to force your heart to be strong in this moment. You do not have to pretend that disappointment has not hurt you. You do not have to dress your prayers in perfect words. The Lord is not frightened by your trembling faith. He is not offended by your tears. He does not turn away from the place where your hope feels buried. The story we are entering is not a hurried story. It moves slowly, like evening light across ancient stones, like footsteps on a dusty road, like grief sitting quietly beside a bed. It is a story of a home that loved Jesus, a family that trusted him, a sickness that came too suddenly, a message sent with faith, a delay that no one understood, and a voice that would one day stand before a sealed tomb and call life back from the dark. Before we walk into Bethany, bring your own burden with you only for a moment, not to carry it alone, not to wrestle with it through the night, but to allow it to be seen in the presence of Christ. Maybe there is a name you cannot stop thinking about. Maybe there is a dream that feels buried. Maybe there is a relationship that feels beyond repair. Maybe there is a part of you that has grown tired of hoping because hoping has hurt too much. Bring that tender place slowly, carefully, without shame. Lay it near the feet of Jesus, not with grand language, not with forced confidence, but with the honest whisper of a weary soul. Lord, this is where I am tired. Lord, this is where I feel late. Lord, this is where I do not know what to believe anymore. And then let the silence around you become softer, because the silence is not empty when Jesus is near. There is a mercy in the way Scripture does not rush past sorrow. It does not hide the trembling moments. It does not pretend that faithful people never feel confused. It lets us see Mary weeping. It lets us hear Martha questioning. It lets us stand beside a tomb and feel the heaviness of 4 long days. And because of that, we can bring our own long days into the story too. We can bring the night as when sleep would not come. We can bring the mornings when the answer still had not arrived. We can bring the ache of trying to trust God while not understanding His timing. And tonight, as your body grows heavier and your breathing becomes calm, you do not need to solve the mystery of timing. You only need to rest inside one truth. Jesus is not careless with those He loves. Jesus is not absent from the house of sorrow. Jesus is not too late, even when every human sign says the moment has passed. Let that truth settle gently over you now, like a blanket of peace. Far from the noise of our own time, there was a small village called Bethany. It rested on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, close enough to Jerusalem that travelers could pass between the village and the city, yet quiet enough to feel removed from the crowding pressure of temple courts, arguments, markets, and restless streets. Bethany was not grand. It did not rise with the power of palaces or the pride of great towers. It was a village of ordinary homes, low stone walls, narrow paths, oil lamps, warm bread, clay jars, and the humble music of daily life. In the evening, shadows would lengthen along the roads. The air would cool. The olive trees would stand in stillness, their leaves catching the last gold of the sun. And in one home in that village, there was a family deeply loved by Jesus. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus shared a home that had become a place of welcome. It was the kind of home where love was not loud, but steady. The kind of home where someone was always preparing, listening, serving, sitting, speaking, waiting, or making room. Martha carried the practical tenderness of care. She noticed what needed to be done. She saw the empty cup, the tired traveler, the unfinished meal, the small disorder that someone else might overlook. Her love moved through her hands. Mary carried a quieter kind of devotion. She knew how to sit close and listen deeply, as though every word from Jesus was bread for the soul. And Lazarus, their brother, was loved with the simple closeness that does not need much explanation. He belonged to them, and they belonged to him. Their lives were woven together by years of shared mornings, shared meals, shared griefs, shared hopes, and the sacred ordinary things that make a household feel alive. Imagine that home before sorrow entered it. Imagine the door open in the late afternoon. Imagine the faint scent of bread cooling, the warmth of a small fire, the texture of woven mats under tired feet, the soft movement of Martha from one task to another, Mary's quiet presence near the place where Jesus had once taught, Lazarus speaking with familiar ease in the room where he had been known since childhood. There was history in that house. There were memories in the walls. There were probably moments of laughter that no one outside the family would have understood. And there was faith there, not perfect faith without questions, but real faith, faith that had grown through nearness to Jesus. They knew him not only as a teacher admired by crowds, not only as a healer spoken of in villages, but as a beloved friend who had sat with them, eaten with them, listened to them, and entered the ordinary rooms of their lives. That is part of what makes the story so tender. The suffering did not come to strangers. It came to a home Jesus loved. Sometimes we imagine that being loved by God means certain sorrows will never cross our doorway. We imagine that faith will become a wall high enough to keep pain outside. But Bethany teaches something gentler and more honest. A home can be loved by Jesus and still face an hour of trembling. A heart can belong to God and still pass through confusion. A family can be precious to Christ and still watch the light dim around a bed. This does not mean his love has failed. It means that his love is deeper than the sorrow that comes. It means he will not remain outside the story. It means that even the house where grief sits down will one day become the place where glory is revealed. So let your mind rest in Bethany for a while. Let the village become quiet around you. Let the hills grow dark beneath the evening sky. Let the lamps begin to glow in the small homes. There is no need to hurry forward yet. There is grace in remembering the peaceful beginning, because sorrow is not the whole story. Before the tomb there was a table. Before the weeping there was welcome. Before the silence there were voices alive in the house. And perhaps this matters for your own heart tonight. Whatever feels buried in your life did not begin as a burial. There was love there. There was meaning there. There was a reason it mattered so much. Jesus does not dismiss that. He sees not only the tomb but everything that came before it. He knows why you cried. He knows why it hurt. He knows the whole story of what you have loved and feared losing. And in that loved home, on a day that may have begun like any other, something changed. Perhaps it started quietly, with Lazarus feeling weaker than usual, his breath a little heavier, his body less steady, his voice softer in the room. At first, maybe Martha told herself it would pass. People became ill. Fevers rose and fell. The body sometimes needed rest, water, stillness, and care. Mary may have watched his face more closely than she admitted, noticing the way strength seemed to drain from him, noticing how the light in his eyes was dimmer than before. The house changed slowly, then all at once. Ordinary sounds became softer, footsteps became careful, conversations became whispers. The air became heavy with the kind of concern that no one wants to name too soon. As the sickness deepened, Martha's hands likely moved with urgent tenderness. Water was brought, cloths were folded, the room was watched, the door was opened and closed. Neighbors may have come near with concern in their eyes. Mary stayed close in the way. Love stays close when there are no answers, when presence becomes the only gift left to give. And Lazarus, the brother they loved, the man whose voice belonged in that house, grew weaker. You can feel the ache in that room if you let yourself enter it slowly. The ache of wanting to help and not knowing how. The ache of watching someone suffer. The ache of hope trying to stand while fear pulls at its rope. And somewhere in that ache, one thought must have become clear. Jesus needed to know the message they sent was simple and full of love. They did not send a long explanation. They did not try to persuade him with many arguments. They did not say, "Hurry, because we deserve this." They did not say, "Come, because we have served you well." They sent a message rooted in relationship. "Lord, the one you love is sick." That was enough. The one you love. Not the one who has earned your attention. Not the one who has performed perfectly. Not the one whose family has never been afraid. The one you love. There is such tenderness there. It is a prayer that leans entirely on the heart of Jesus. And maybe tonight your prayer can be that simple too. Lord, the one you love is tired. Lord, the one you love is afraid. Lord, the one you love does not know how to keep going. You do not need perfect words when you are resting in perfect mercy. After the message was sent, the waiting began. And waiting has its own sound. It is the sound of someone pausing at the doorway because footsteps were heard outside. It is the sound of breath held for a moment. It is the sound of a sister listening for news. It is the sound of hope rising and then sitting back down again. Mary and Martha knew what Jesus could do. They had heard of blind eyes opened. They had heard of broken bodies restored. They had seen enough of him to believe that his presence could change the room. So they waited with a kind of faith that looks toward the road. Surely he would come. Surely love would bring him quickly. Surely the message would reach him, and he would rise, and every step would bring him closer to Bethany, closer to the doorway, closer to the bed where Lazarus lay fading. But the road remained empty. The shadows shifted across the floor. The lamp burned low. The fever did not break. The breathing did not become easier. And the waiting that began with confidence slowly became pierced with questions. This is often the hardest place for the soul to rest. Not before we pray, and not after the answer comes, but between the cry and the arrival, between "Lord, please help," and the first visible sign that help is near. In that space, the mind can become crowded with fear. The heart can begin to measure God's love by the speed of his response. But love is not always measured by speed. Sometimes love is moving in ways hidden from the room where we wait. Sometimes Jesus is preparing something larger than the answer we first imagined. And still the waiting hurts. He knows that it hurts. So if you are waiting tonight, let Bethany hold you gently. Let Mary and Martha sit beside you in the mystery. Let the quiet house remind you that faithful people have waited with tears in their eyes. You are not failing because you feel afraid. You are not faithless because the delay has wounded you. You are not forgotten because the road looks empty. The sisters sent word to Jesus, and for a while nothing seemed to change. Yet the story was not abandoned. The silence was not the ending. The delay was not the absence of love. And the doorway that remained empty for a time would not remain empty forever. Rest now in the first quiet promise of this story. Jesus heard, Jesus loved, Jesus knew. And even before anyone in Bethany understood what he was doing, he was already holding the sorrow that would soon be transformed by his voice. Some distance away from Bethany, beyond the rooms where Mary and Martha were watching their brother grow weaker, Jesus received the message, "Lord, the one you love is sick." The words came carrying the dust of the road, the urgency of a frightened household, and the tenderness of a family that believed his love would move toward them at once. Around him, the world continued in its ordinary rhythm. The sun still warmed the earth. The wind still moved through dry grasses. Disciples still gathered near him, listening, watching, trying to understand the mystery of a life lived so completely in the will of the Father. But into that ordinary day came a message from a beloved home, a message that seemed to ask for immediate movement, immediate compassion, immediate healing, and Jesus heard it. He did not miss the sorrow hidden inside the words. He did not overlook the fear in Mary and Martha's hearts. He did not need anyone to explain to him how much Lazarus mattered. The one you love is sick. It was true. Lazarus was loved. Mary was loved. Martha was loved. Bethany was loved. And yet in the mystery of divine timing, Jesus did not rise quickly and hurry down the road. This is a place where the heart often becomes very quiet, because we understand urgency. We understand the feeling of needing God now. We understand the ache of a prayer that does not feel like it can wait another day, another hour, another breath. We understand Mary and Martha, more deeply than we may want to admit. If we had been in that home, watching Lazarus weaken, feeling his life slipping into a place we could not reach, we would have looked toward the road again and again. We would have listened for footsteps. We would have hoped to see the figure of Jesus coming through the dust, his face steady, his presence enough to change everything. But Scripture tells us something that feels almost impossible at first. When Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He stayed, not because his love was small, not because his attention had wandered, not because Bethany had stopped mattering to him. He stayed because there was something unfolding that no one in Bethany could see yet, something deeper than a healing at a bedside. Something that would reveal not only that Jesus could prevent death, but that death itself was not stronger than his voice. The land around him was open and ancient, shaped by sun, stone, and wind. Imagine the pale earth beneath his feet, the distant hills layered in blue and brown, the sky wide above him, the air dry and quiet in the afternoon light. His disciples may have watched his face after the message was spoken. Perhaps they expected immediate concern to become immediate action. Perhaps they waited for him to stand, to gather them, to begin the journey toward Judea. But Jesus moved in a peace that was not the same as human haste. His stillness was not indifference. His waiting was not neglect. There was no panic in him, because there was no helplessness in him. He knew the sorrow was real, but he also knew the Father's purpose was greater than what the moment appeared to demand. And so the day continued. The light shifted, shadows lengthened. Evening came softly. The disciples remained near him, and somewhere far away in the house in Bethany, 2 sisters kept waiting for the road to bring the one they loved. For the listener who feels forgotten tonight, this part of the story may feel tender and difficult, because delay can feel like abandonment when the heart is breaking. Silence can feel like refusal when the need is desperate. Waiting can begin to bruise the soul when every moment seems to matter. You may have lived inside your own version of those 2 days. You may have prayed and then watched nothing change. You may have reached toward heaven with every bit of faith you had, only to find yourself still standing in the same room, still facing the same fear, still hearing the same silence. And the mind can become tired from trying to make sense of God's timing. But listen gently. The delay of Jesus was not the absence of Jesus. The stillness of Jesus was not the coldness of Jesus. The waiting of Jesus was not a sign that Lazarus was unloved. In fact, the story says clearly that Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. His love is stated before the delay is described, so that the soul will not confuse waiting with rejection. He loved them. And still he waited. He waited within love. He waited within purpose. He waited within a wisdom that grief could not yet understand. So rest for a moment with the mystery, even if your heart cannot explain it. Let the quiet landscape around Jesus become part of the night around you. Let the warm stones, the still air, the distant hills, and the slow passing of those 2 days teach your breathing to soften. Jesus was not rushed by fear. Jesus was not ruled by panic. Jesus was not shaken by what seemed impossible. He knew the path ahead. He knew the tears he would meet. He knew the tomb he would approach. He knew the stone that would stand sealed before him. He knew the name he would call. And because he knew the end from the beginning, he could remain steady in the middle. This does not make the waiting painless. It does not make Mary's tears less real. It does not make Martha's questions wrong. But it reveals that the story was being held by stronger hands than they could see. And maybe your story is being held that way too. Not abandoned, not forgotten, not dismissed. Held in the hands of the one who may not move according to your clock, but who never stops moving according to love. Back in Bethany, the hours became heavier. The house that had once been full of familiar life now seemed to breathe with worry. The lamp near Lazarus may have flickered softly against the wall. The room may have smelled of oil, linen, warm stone, and the faint bitterness of sickness. Outside, the village continued in hushed awareness. Neighbors knew. People always know when sorrow has begun to gather around a home. Footsteps slowed near the doorway. Voices became lower. Women may have come in and out quietly, bringing what comfort they could, offering food, water, presents, and the solemn companionship that surrounds a family in distress. But inside the room, Mary and Martha were facing the one thing all their care could not stop. Lazarus was slipping away. The brother they had known, spoken with, eaten beside, laughed with, leaned on, and loved through ordinary years, was moving beyond the reach of their hands. And every breath mattered. There is a particular helplessness that comes when love watches suffering and cannot remove it. Martha, who knew how to act, how to serve, how to prepare, how to do the next needed thing, may have found herself doing everything she could and still feeling the terrible limits of human care. She could adjust the cloth, she could bring water, she could keep watch, she could send for Jesus. She could open the door, listen for news, return to the room, and look again at her brother's face. But she could not command the fever to leave. She could not force strength back into his body. She could not make the road bring Jesus faster. Mary, whose heart was so often quiet and receptive, may have felt the grief sinking inward, deep and wordless. She may have stayed close, watching Lazarus with eyes that had already begun to fill with tears. Perhaps she remembered Jesus sitting in that home. Perhaps she remembered his voice. Perhaps she held on to the thought that he would come, that surely he would come before the final moment. Love hopes like that. Love keeps watching the door even when fear begins to rise. But the final moment came. The breath that had been labored grew faint. The room gathered itself around a silence no one wanted. The sisters may have leaned closer, listening, waiting, praying for one more breath, one more movement, one more sign that life remained. And then Lazarus died. The house changed in an instant. There are silences that are not like other silences. This was not the peaceful quiet of evening. It was the silence after a voice has disappeared from a home. The silence after hope has been struck down. The silence after the thing everyone feared has happened. Mary and Martha had sent for Jesus while Lazarus was still alive. They had believed there was time. They had believed the message would reach him soon enough. But now the bed held the stillness of death, and the room held the grief of those who loved him. It must have felt like the story had passed beyond the place where even hope knew how to speak. And in that loved home, on a day that may have begun like any other, something changed. Perhaps it started quietly, with Lazarus feeling weaker than usual, his breath a little heavier, his body less steady, his voice softer in the room. At first, maybe Martha told herself it would pass. People became ill. Fevers rose and fell. The body sometimes needed rest, water, stillness, and care. Mary may have watched his face more closely than she admitted, noticing the way strength seemed to drain from him, noticing how the light in his eyes was dimmer than before. The house changed slowly, then all at once. Ordinary sounds became softer, footsteps became careful, conversations became whispers. The air became heavy with the kind of concern that no one wants to name too soon. As the sickness deepened, Martha's hands likely moved with urgent tenderness. Water was brought, cloths were folded, the room was watched, the door was opened and closed. Neighbors may have come near with concern in their eyes. Mary stayed close in the way. Love stays close when there are no answers, when presence becomes the only gift left to give. And Lazarus, the brother they loved, the man whose voice belonged in that house, grew weaker. You can feel the ache in that room if you let yourself enter it slowly. The ache of wanting to help and not knowing how. The ache of watching someone suffer. The ache of hope trying to stand while fear pulls at its robe. And somewhere in that ache, one thought must have become clear. Jesus needed to know. The message they sent was simple and full of love. They did not send a long explanation. They did not try to persuade him with many arguments. They did not say, "Hurry, because we deserve this." They did not say, "Come, because we have served you well." They sent a message rooted in relationship. Lord, the one you love is sick. That was enough. The one you love. Not the one who has earned your attention. Not the one who has performed perfectly. Not the one whose family has never been afraid. The one you love. There is such tenderness there. It is a prayer that leans entirely on the heart of Jesus. And maybe tonight your prayer can be that simple too. Lord, the one you love is tired. Lord, the one you love is afraid. Lord, the one you love does not know how to keep going. You do not need perfect words when you are resting in perfect mercy. After the message was sent, the waiting began. And waiting has its own sound. It is the sound of someone pausing at the doorway because footsteps were heard outside. It is the sound of breath held for a moment. It is the sound of a sister listening for news. It is the sound of hope rising and then sitting back down again. Mary and Martha knew what Jesus could do. They had heard of blind eyes opened. They had heard of broken bodies restored. They had seen enough of him to believe that his presence could change the room. So they waited with a kind of faith that looks toward the road. Surely he would come. Surely love would bring him quickly. Surely the message would reach him, and he would rise, and every step would bring him closer to Bethany, closer to the doorway, closer to the bed where Lazarus lay fading. But the road remained empty. The shadows shifted across the floor. The lamp burned low. The fever did not break. The breathing did not become easier. And the waiting that began with confidence slowly became pierced with questions. This is often the hardest place for the soul to rest. Not before we pray, and not after the answer comes, but between the cry and the arrival. Between "Lord, please help," and the first visible sign that help is near. In that space, the mind can become crowded with fear. The heart can begin to measure God's love by the speed of his response. But love is not always measured by speed. Sometimes love is moving in ways hidden from the room where we wait. Sometimes Jesus is preparing something larger than the answer we first imagined. And still the waiting hurts. He knows that it hurts. So if you are waiting tonight, let Bethany hold you gently. Let Mary and Martha sit beside you in the mystery. Let the quiet house remind you that faithful people have waited with tears in their eyes. You are not failing because you feel afraid. You are not faithless because the delay has wounded you. You are not forgotten because the road looks empty. The sisters sent word to Jesus, and for a while nothing seemed to change. Yet the story was not abandoned. The silence was not the ending. The delay was not the absence of love. And the doorway that remained empty for a time would not remain empty forever. Rest now in the first quiet promise of this story. Jesus heard, Jesus loved, Jesus knew. And even before anyone in Bethany understood what he was doing, he was already holding the sorrow that would soon be transformed by his voice. Martha stood before him, pulled between sorrow and revelation. The road, the village, the mourners behind her, the tomb nearby, the memory of Lazarus, the ache of delay, and the presence of Jesus all gathered into one sacred moment. Jesus asked her to believe, not in a shallow way, not in a way that erased her grief, but in a way that anchored her to who he was. And Martha, still grieving, still wounded, still without her brother beside her, confessed that he was the Christ, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. This was faith in the shadow of a tomb. This was trust with tears still close. This was not faith after everything had been restored. It was faith before the miracle, faith while the stone still stood, faith while the house still mourned. And perhaps that is the kind of faith being gently awakened in you tonight. Not loud faith, not effortless faith, not faith that understands the whole path, but faith that can whisper, even now, Jesus, you are who you say you are. And so Jesus had come after 4 days, but he had not come too late. The difference between those two things is everything. He came after the waiting. He came after the sickness. He came after the last breath. He came after the burial. He came after the stone. He came after human hope had collapsed. But he did not come after his power had ended. He did not come after his love had failed. He did not come after the Father's purpose had been lost. He came into the fullness of impossibility, so that the glory of God could be seen where no human strength remained. Let your soul rest inside that truth as the night grows quieter. There may be places in your life where Jesus seems delayed. There may be prayers that feel unanswered. There may be stones you cannot move and endings you cannot undo. But the road is not empty forever. The story is not finished because you cannot see the next page. The Lord of life knows the way to Bethany. He knows how to find the grieving heart. He knows how to stand before what seems final. And when he arrives, even after 4 days, he brings with him a life that death cannot command. After Martha had spoken with Jesus, after her wounded faith had met his steady promise, she went back toward the house where grief still gathered. The village of Bethany remained heavy with mourning, and the home that had once welcomed Jesus with warmth and movement was now filled with the low ache of loss. People sat close together in the shadowed rooms. Some spoke softly, some wept. Some simply stayed near, because there are moments when words become too small, and presence is the only comfort love knows how to offer. Mary was still inside, surrounded by the sorrow of those who had come to console her. Her heart had already carried days of waiting, hours of watching, the final silence of her brother's last breath, and the strange emptiness that follows burial, when the body is gone from the house, but memory remains in every corner. Then Martha came to her quietly and said that the teacher was here and was calling for her. The words must have passed through Mary like a tremor of light in a darkened room, The teacher is here. He is calling for you. Mary rose quickly. Grief may have made her body heavy, but love moved her toward Jesus. The mourners who sat with her saw her stand and followed, thinking she was going to the tomb to weep there. They did not understand that she was being drawn, not first to the place of death, but to the presence of the one who had come to meet her there. Outside, the air of Bethany may have carried the dust of footsteps and the warmth of the day. The road beneath Mary was familiar, yet everything in her world had changed. Every stone, every wall, every olive tree, every doorway may have seemed to hold the memory of Lazarus. And somewhere ahead stood Jesus, the one she had listened to, the one she had loved, the one she had trusted, the one who had not come before Lazarus died. When sorrow and faith meet like that, the soul does not always know whether it is running toward comfort or toward the question that has hurt the most. When Mary reached Jesus, she fell at his feet. This was the same place where her heart had once found peace, the same posture of surrender, the same nearness to him that had shaped her devotion. But now she came with tears. Now she came with the ache of loss. Now she came carrying the sentence that had been living inside her grief. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It was not a cold accusation. It was not unbelief speaking from a hardened heart. It was love wounded by delay. It was faith trying to breathe beneath sorrow. It was the honest prayer of someone who still believed Jesus could have changed everything, and that belief made the pain sharper. If you had been here, many hearts have prayed some version of those words. Lord, if you had moved sooner. Lord, if you had answered then. Lord, if you had stopped what happened. Lord, if you had come when I first called. Tonight, if those words have ever lived inside you, know this gently. Jesus does not push Mary away for speaking them. He lets her bring the wound to his feet. There is deep mercy in the way Jesus receives Mary's grief. He does not tell her to stop crying. He does not correct her before he comforts her. He does not demand that she understand the delay before she is allowed to be near him. He sees her weeping, and he sees the people with her weeping, and something moves deeply within him. The sorrow of Bethany does not remain distant from his heart. The tears of Mary are not an inconvenience to his mission. The lament of the mourners is not background noise to him. He enters it. He feels the weight of it. He stands in the place where human hearts are breaking, and he is not untouched. This matters for the listener tonight who has been afraid that grief makes them less faithful. It does not. Tears at the feet of Jesus are still prayers. Questions spoken in his presence are still held by his love. The part of you that does not understand can still come close. The part of you that aches can still be called by him. Jesus asked where they had laid Lazarus, and the mourners said, Lord, come and see. Those words open a quiet path toward the tomb. Come and see. Come and see the place where our hope ended. Come and see the stone we could not move. Come and see the place where love had to say goodbye. Come and see the evidence that time has passed and nothing can be done. In a gentle way, this becomes an invitation the heart can offer to Jesus tonight. Lord, come and see the place I do not talk about. Come and see the disappointment I have buried. Come and see the prayer that seemed unanswered. Come and see the room inside me where I stopped expecting anything to change. Not because he does not already know, but because healing often begins when we stop hiding the tomb from the one who is not afraid of it. Jesus walks with them toward the place of burial. He does not avoid the sorrow. He does not remain safely at the edge of the village. He goes with them all the way to the sealed place. And then Scripture gives us one of the tenderest truths ever spoken about the heart of Christ. Jesus wept. The Lord of life stood near the tomb of his friend, surrounded by mourners, standing before the stone. He already knew he would command to move, and he wept. His tears were not the tears of helplessness. They were the tears of holy compassion. He knew resurrection was coming, and still he wept with those who were grieving. He knew Lazarus would walk out, and still he entered the pain of the sisters. He knew the miracle was near, and still he did not rush past the wound. This is the kindness of Jesus. He does not only meet you at the moment of breakthrough, he meets you in the trembling before it. He does not only love you when you are praising, he loves you when you are weeping. He does not only stand with you when the stone has rolled away, he stands with you while it is still sealed and heavy. Let that truth become soft around you now. Jesus is not embarrassed by your sorrow. Jesus is not impatient with your healing. Jesus is not looking at your grief as something too messy for his presence. He wept beside a tomb. He allowed his love to be visible in tears. And if he was willing to weep with Mary and Martha, then he is willing to be near the grief you have carried quietly. The grief over what did not happen, the grief over what changed, the grief over the answer that seemed delayed until the heart could hardly bear it. In your modern world, so much pressure tells you to move on quickly, to explain everything, to be productive again, to heal on schedule, to hide the places where hope feels fragile. But Jesus does not heal like the world hurries. He is gentle, he is patient, he is unafraid of slow restoration. What you call delay may be a place where he is preparing deeper roots. What you call silence may be a place where he is teaching your soul to recognize his nearness beyond visible answers. What you call too late may become the very ground where his glory is revealed in a way you never could have imagined. The tomb stood near them, cut into the rock, cool and shadowed, separated from the warmth of the village by stone and grief. The entrance was covered, and the stone looked final. It had the weight of human conclusion. It said, "This is where the story ends." It said, "Nothing more can be done." It said, "The one who was loved is now beyond reach." The air around a tomb is different from the air inside a home. It carries the stillness of separation. The mourners gathered near, their faces marked by days of sorrow. Mary and Martha stood close to Jesus, each carrying her own form of love and pain. Some of the people looked at his tears and said, "See how he loved him." Others wondered why the one who opened the eyes of the blind man could not have kept Lazarus from dying. Even there, near the place of miracle, people were still trying to understand him through the question of delay. Why did he not prevent this? Why did he not come sooner? Why did he let the stone be set? Jesus came to the tomb deeply moved. The path of the story had reached the place that looked most impossible. Not the sickbed, where healing might still have seemed imaginable. Not the doorway, where a last-minute arrival might have saved the day. Not even the first hour after death, when shock still feels unreal. He came to the tomb after 4 days, when the body had been wrapped, when the mourners had gathered, when the stone had been placed, when hope had been forced to accept what human eyes could see. And this is where the love of God often overturns the conclusions of the heart. He is not limited to the moment you thought was your last chance. He is not blocked by the stone you cannot move. He is not confused by the delay that has confused you. He is not made powerless by the evidence that made you stop hoping. If he chooses to prepare glory in a place that looks final, then the final looking place becomes holy ground. Then Jesus gave a command that must have startled everyone who heard it. Take away the stone. The words were simple, but they opened a trembling space between grief and obedience. The stone was not small. The stone was not symbolic to the people standing there. It sealed a real tomb. It protected the living from the reality of death inside. It marked the boundary between what had been loved and what had been lost. To move it was to face what everyone had been trying to survive. Martha, practical and honest, spoke from the reality before her. Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. She was not wrong. Her words were human, reasonable, and grounded in what death means. Faith does not always erase the mind's awareness of difficulty. Sometimes faith stands beside very real facts and trembles. Martha believed Jesus was the Christ, and still she knew the tomb had been sealed for 4 days. She trusted him, and still the thought of opening the tomb was painful. Jesus answered her with a reminder of his promise. Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? He was not asking Martha to deny the odor of death. He was asking her to look beyond it to the glory of God. He was not asking her to pretend 4 days had not passed. He was asking her to trust that 4 days were not stronger than him. He was not asking her to make herself brave by force. He was inviting her to remain near enough to witness what love was about to do. This is a gentle word for your heart tonight. God is not asking you to deny the reality of what hurt you. He is not asking you to pretend the delay was easy. He is not asking you to call the tomb beautiful before he has brought life from it. He is asking you to let him stand before it. He is asking you to allow his presence into the place you had sealed away. He is asking tenderly for the stone to be moved, not because the past did not matter, but because he is not finished speaking life. The people moved the stone. Imagine the sound of it, slow and heavy, scraping against the ground. Imagine the gathered mourners growing still. Imagine Mary's breath caught in her chest. Imagine Martha standing between fear and obedience, every part of her heart exposed. Imagine the tomb opening to daylight for the first time since Lazarus had been placed inside. Dust may have stirred. The cool darkness within may have met the warm air outside. Everyone present knew the impossibility of the moment. No one was pretending. No one was trying to make the scene easier than it was. This was not a small problem becoming slightly better. This was death standing open before the Son of God, and Jesus lifted his eyes to the Father. Before he called Lazarus, he prayed. He thanked the Father for hearing him, and he spoke in the hearing of those around him, so that they might believe. Even at the edge of the tomb, Jesus was in communion with the Father. Even in the place of human despair, heaven was not distant. The Father had heard, the Son was present. The Spirit of life was moving where no human strength could go. There are places in your own life that may feel like that opened tomb. Places you almost do not want to look at because looking hurts. Places where disappointment has had time to settle. Places where the facts seem too heavy for hope. Places where you say, Lord, it has been too long. Lord, the damage is too deep. Lord, the dream has been buried too many days. Lord, I do not know if anything living can come from this now, but the open tomb in Bethany teaches us that preparation does not always feel like preparation while it is happening. Sometimes preparation feels like delay. Sometimes preparation feels like being brought to the end of your own strength. Sometimes preparation feels like the stone being moved from a place you wanted to keep sealed. But God is not cruel in his preparation. He prepares the place where his voice will be heard clearly. He prepares the heart to know that the miracle was not manufactured by human control. He prepares the witnesses to understand that when life comes, it comes from him. Your waiting has not been wasted in his hands. Your tears have not been ignored. Your buried hope has not been forgotten. Then Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" His voice entered the tomb. His voice crossed the boundary no human voice could cross. His voice reached into darkness, into stillness, into the place where everyone believed Lazarus could no longer hear. The command was personal. Lazarus. He called him by name. Not a vague call into the air, not a distant declaration, but a direct summons from the Lord of life to the friend he loved. Come out. The voice that calmed storms, the voice that forgave sins, the voice that taught on hillsides and welcomed the weary now spoke into death itself. And death obeyed. The darkness that had held Lazarus could not keep him. The grave clothes that wrapped him could not define him. The stone that had sealed him could not have the final word. Life answered the voice of Jesus. Imagine the stillness of that moment just before anyone saw movement. The mourners silent, Mary and Martha fixed upon the tomb, the disciples watching with wonder they could not yet put into words. The open entrance stood dark against the light. Then something changed. A shape appeared within the shadow. Lazarus came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, his face wrapped with a cloth. He was alive. The one who had been mourned was standing. The one who had been sealed away had heard the voice of Jesus. The one whose story everyone thought had ended was now breathing in the daylight. What must that moment have done to Mary's heart? What must it have done to Martha's? The sentence, "If you had been here, my brother would not have died," was not mocked or dismissed. It was answered with a revelation greater than they had known how to ask for. Jesus had not only healed sickness, he had called life out of death. And then Jesus said, "Unbind him and let him go." This too is full of mercy. Lazarus was alive, but still wrapped in the garments of the tomb. Life had returned, but the signs of burial still needed to be removed. Others were invited into that tender work. They would come close. They would touch the linen. They would help free him from what had covered him. The miracle of life belonged to Jesus, and the work of unbinding became a community of restoration. This is gentle wisdom for your own healing. Sometimes when God restores life in you, there are still grave clothes to be loosened. Old fears, old patterns, old grief, old ways of thinking that belong to the tomb but no longer belong to the person Christ is calling forward. Healing may continue after the miracle begins. Do not be discouraged if you feel life returning slowly. Do not be ashamed if peace comes in layers. Do not think the miracle is less real because some wrapping still needs to fall away. Jesus calls you into life, and then, with patience, he teaches you to walk free. The village that had been filled with mourning now stood in the shock of impossible joy. The same road that had carried mourners now held witnesses. The same sisters who had waited through delay now saw their brother restored to them. The same tomb that had seemed to declare the end now became the place where the glory of God was revealed. Jesus had wept, and Jesus had called, and Jesus had overcome. Nothing about the sorrow had been fake. Nothing about the waiting had been easy. Nothing about the death had been symbolic only. The pain was real and the power was greater. The delay was real and the love was deeper. The stone was real and the voice of Jesus was stronger. This is the healing message for your heart tonight. God is not too late because your situation looks late. God is not finished because you cannot see movement yet. God is not absent because you have walked through days of grief. In the hands of Christ, even what has been buried can become a place where His voice is heard. So let the miracle at Bethany become soft within you, not as noise, not as pressure, but as peace. You do not have to know how God will answer every prayer. You do not have to understand every delay. You do not have to force a resurrection in your own strength. Lazarus did not raise himself. Mary did not move heaven by perfect composure. Martha did not solve the problem by understanding. The mourners did not create life by effort. Jesus spoke. Jesus called. Jesus brought life where human power had ended. Tonight you are allowed to rest because the deepest work belongs to Him. You are allowed to sleep because the stone is not too heavy for Him. You are allowed to release the timeline because His love is not bound by your fear of lateness. You are allowed to place your buried hopes into His hands and let Him decide how glory will come. Maybe your modern pain does not look like a tomb carved into a hillside. Maybe it looks like a quiet bedroom where you cannot sleep. Maybe it looks like a phone that does not ring. Maybe it looks like medical news you did not want. Maybe it looks like a relationship that has gone silent, a dream that has not opened, a job that ended, a family wound that still aches, a future that feels uncertain, or a prayer you have prayed so many times that the words feel worn smooth. Jesus knows how to enter those places too. He knows the tombs of the heart. He knows the stones that no one else sees. He knows the part of you that has stopped expecting life. And He does not come to shame you for feeling tired. He comes as resurrection and life. He comes with tears of compassion and authority that darkness cannot resist. He comes not always when you expect it, not always in the way you first imagined, but always with love that is wiser than fear. Let the name Lazarus linger in your thoughts for a moment, and then gently remember that Jesus knows your name too. The voice that called into the tomb is not a distant voice. It is the voice of the shepherd who calls his own by name. It is the voice that knows where you are, even when you feel hidden. It is the voice that can reach the places in you that no human comfort can reach. When He calls, He does not call you into panic. He calls you into life. He calls you out of despair, one breath at a time. He calls you out of the belief that nothing can change. He calls you out of the darkness of being defined by what happened. He calls you out of the grave clothes of shame, fear, regret, and exhaustion. And even if the walking is slow, even if your first steps feel unsteady, life has begun wherever His voice is received. Now let your breathing become calm again. Let the story settle, not as something you must analyze, but as something you can rest inside. Mary's tears were seen. Martha's questions were heard. Lazarus was called. The stone was moved. The tomb was opened. The glory of God was revealed. And through it all, Jesus was never late in the way fear imagined. He arrived after the moment Mary and Martha hoped for. but he arrived with a revelation that would hold their faith forever. Tonight, if you are grieving an answer that did not come on your schedule, let this story hold you gently. Your delay may be painful, but it is not proof of abandonment. Your waiting may be long, but it is not wasted in the hands of God. Your hope may feel buried, but buried is not the same as beyond his reach. Rest now in the care of the one whose voice enters darkness and brings life. Rest in the compassion of the one who weeps with you. Rest in the power of the one who calls by name. Rest in Jesus, who is never too late.